let's see. Alright, I think we're live, folks. We've got a cool show going on today. Let me know if the audio, if there's anything horribly wrong with it. I hope there isn't. I'm kind of blind in my studio, but I got chat up and stuff like that, so anyone that stops by, very cool. Good to see you. It is Duck. As you can see, got a sort of a full schedule and stuff, so I'm gonna go over that, but we're doing some cool stuff today. I'm gonna do a live workout, so we're gonna I'm gonna bounce around the studio, kind of take you guys to my basic, it's not even a home gym, it's just weights. One of the things I talked about on my other stream is thinking about doing a cut, and so relative to like doing a big weight cut or something like that, I'm just going to show you kind of how I approach that kind of stuff, but we're going to work out, and because we're live on the internet, there's other internet stuff going on, right? That's the exciting part. You get these old topics, you get the drama llama coming back up, there's not really drama llama stuff that we're talking about and all that, but we did have a good conversation with Digital Gnosis the other day, right? That's kind of fun. It's like the smarter stuff. And so we had a conversation about Auguste Comte, and either the religion or the ideology, the philosophy of humanism. That stuff's always super interesting. Can you say what Auguste Comte is? Is it a religion? Is it an ideology? I don't know. I honestly don't know. And so, one of the things I always think about, is when we take like this idea from the 1800s, I'm always curious what it responds to, what people should be saying and thinking about it now, and kind of going from there. And so, I'm going to take us through sort of, if you can see, this is our sort of show. If there's anyone in chat, let me know what you want to do. If you want to talk or do something different, cool. Kind of what I put together here. Let me just show you. That's a little bit easier. So if we go to this, we're gonna do the second. We're gonna work out first, just to kind of get it out of the way. But I've got positivism and humanism here. We're gonna watch a quick, this is like a 2-minute video on Comte. So who was he? What is humanism? Why are all these atheists all over the world? People like myself. Why do we know what humanism is? How many atheists are humanists? And sort of the kind of questions when, I've been talking about being a good lazy liberal. And so if we're being a good lazy liberal with this stuff, maybe we should be thinking a little bit more about the workout we're about to get, but the kind of stuff I'm thinking about is positivism. What are the metaphysics? What's the epistemology? Like, why is it so different from being a Catholic in Europe, in the 19th century, to say, well, I'm not a Catholic anymore. I'm actually a humanist. Do we talk about like the nature of reality differently? How do people argue about knowing things? What do those conversations sound like? And so when we plug into Digital Gnosis, I'll show you that in a second. That we're gonna get to some of that. The other cool stuff is what is humanism? Is it actually a religion? Is it an ideology? Can we just stop and say that Auguste Comte was a philosopher? It doesn't sound, it's very rare. Like, we sort of have Karl Marx, who we can say, well, Karl Marx was an economist. Karl Marx was he was sort of a philosopher. But Karl Marx was definitely an ideologue. He was definitely ideological. What is an ideology? When we're talking about describing a problem we see in the world, and maybe why we want that problem to be solved or to be otherwise, does Auguste Comte, I want to know what you think. Does he have a light enough touch for us to sort of start thinking about, just kind of accepting what he wrote for what it is, or do we have to say, well, no, this guy is political. This guy's been political since the beginning, and not only is he political, but he's actually deeply asking and needs us. He requires us to replace our spiritual worldview, with this positivism and humanism thing. And then, this isn't something, digital gnosis and I talked about, this isn't, this didn't come up, but sort of the rifle butt, the tail end of Auguste Comte is, as much as he's a big science dude, some of you guys might already know that, he's big in empirical observation, but he ultimately he needs people to believe this sort of ethical position, talking about the heart. It's almost this sort of, it's not that amorphous, but it's this idea of spirit or something else. And so, we're going to be pretty excited about that. Let's switch over. I'm just going to show you, we're going to have a video up on this screen. I don't know if you can, I hope you can still hear me. We're going to have a video, if you can picture it, kind of where this is going. That's where I'm going to work out, so we're going to go do that in a couple minutes. We've got some nice gym music. We'll keep this blaring. And then ultimately, this is what we'll do when I get back from the gym. Give me a quick chance to rest. Just a couple minutes. I'm gonna kind of re-listen and see if I can relearn. Nathan was really in control. Digital gnosis. He was taking that educator role, that educator position. He was also very accurately speaking to things that I was telling him about Auguste Comte and my belief in, my supposed belief in humanism. I'm still sifting through it. Lazy liberal again, being the lazy liberal. And so, I really want you guys to also share that experience. This is about, it's a 15-20 minute clip. But I hope you are as excited as I am, to listen to this. I'm getting jacked up. I don't know. I might only go work out for 5 or 10 minutes. We'll see. If there's not that many people in the stream, then, it's just me screaming from the mountaintop. But we're gonna give it a go. We're gonna try it out anyways. And from my perspective, this was a worthwhile conversation. So let's cue the intro and then I'll introduce the gym stuff. All right, so I just want to test out my camera. So if you are here, cool, hang out for just a second. This only takes like 30 seconds to set up, but I do have to, in order to accomplish this, I've got to flip back to, the gym screen where I don't have audio. So let me try this out real quick. So we should be good. So I'm gonna bounce out to the gym area, and we're just gonna trust that this works. If it doesn't, there's not a ton of people here, so good luck to us with that. Let's go. Ryan, Radical Coder is here. Oh, sorry. I don't have good cardio. If you guys joined and you saw like 10 minutes of me working out, the cardio's not quite there yet. Everything else is. But yeah, you know, I got back from 5 miles today, and I'm fasted, so the excuse train starts piling up. But I wanted to save some energy, right? We're talking about philosophy. We're talking about humanism. So, yeah, you know. Yeah. So that's, I'll just share kind of what I'm working on. I'm working on, you know, this is weird. I'll use this communism book. I mean, communism's fun to talk about. You know, the claims they make are morally grounding. They might not make sense, but, you know, I'm going to bring these books back into it in a minute, by the way, but in terms of, like, you know, what I'm working on, it's like, you know, if I just go to extend this and I can feel when I'm just relaxed, if I even just extend my arm with nothing in it, I should feel my muscle going from no tension to, like, at this point here, creating tension for the first time. You don't need to be that, like, bro-ish or bodybuilder about it. But what I'm trying to figure out is, as I go out and there's like actually, you know, hundreds of thousands of muscle fibers and cells in that little area, you know, I'm trying to like create that lever with just letting out some tension, and then picking it back up. Letting out some tension, picking it back up, using my big old caboose and thighs and stuff like that. And so a lot of those workouts where I'm extending or falling, you know, is trying to get that sort of cyclical motion down. But, yeah, we should have emo music playing. This is the other thing. I was thinking about fighting the music. You know, if I turn the music up a bit, can you guys still hear me? Can you still listen to me even? And so that's almost like life philosophy stuff too, is like, you know, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and focus on myself, make myself better for the community and all this other stuff, you know, like that kind of stuff is, you know, that's the kind of stuff that's under our control, you know. There's other stuff that isn't, you know, and so it's important to consider, you know, at least kind of earmark that stuff, even if it's not sort of, you know, I don't know what I was saying. Anyways, where were we? I was going to go on and I'd do a little thing. I was going to share a video on humanism I did with, yeah, Nathan from Digital Gnosis had a panel. So let's switch over there. You know, you guys can see I have his banner up. I should have pinned a note in chat with a link to his channel. So this guy's like an actual trained philosopher, great philosopher. He had me on, and I wanted to ask him about Comte because his little tag down here, you can see, you know, if I make this a little bit bigger, you can see he's calling himself a postmodern neo-Marxist. So without an agenda, maybe a little bit of aggression, I wanted to ask him, you know, what does that mean? If I believe in science and positivism, am I allowed to do that? Is that how far we're going to take it, bro? And so I'm going to try and catch my breath from the workout. You know, if anyone's here for the workout, it is done. Go back in the video. I can't breathe. Love, duck. Okay. So I'm just going to play this video, and again, the context for this entire conversation is, you know, humanism is important. It might be a religion, it might be an idea, it might be a philosophy. And so trying to sort of pin something down that someone who isn't a humanist might say, yeah, I love the emo music as well. And so, yeah, you know, like with Auguste Comte and stuff, you know, talking to someone who has no idea, who hasn't, you know, ever subscribed to humanism, maybe doesn't know why we call things that a humanist might say truth claims. You that stuff's all important. So we're gonna do this backwards because I know at least Radical Coder in the chat is smart enough. So we're gonna listen to a professional philosopher and myself, a serious amateur philosopher. We're gonna talk about this stuff. It's gonna intensify, I think. But like at the end of the day, we're gonna watch this more simple video. I hope that's informative. We might talk about Comte. We might go back to working out a little bit. But we're just gonna settle in and check out what digital gnosis, what this guy's got to say. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get this stuff all right-sized. And Ryan, if you don't mind doing a sound check, making sure the sound's all right.
I can just start kind of rambling about the things that you've said, but if there's a more specific avenue you want me to take through that, I'm happy to go with that.
Yeah, so like, just for people that are somewhat familiar with Comte already, I would say like the sort of most important claim is that, when you're living in a, society evolves basically. And when you're living in a society like maybe ancient Babylon or Egyptian, and everything is based on superstition, that is sort of the modality or the type of knowledge seeking that people go after. You're not going to necessarily always produce true claims. It may even be difficult from an ideological perspective to produce moral claims. You're just by and large going to have a worse society. And as you start evolving into a metaphysical society and making judgments based on the nature of reality, so even something like Machiavelli describing a leader who has both a will, who is also subject to like a fortune or luck. You can be an unlucky skilled leader. That's what Machiavelli says. That might not be what the ancient Greeks or the ancient Israelites and Jews would have said. That gets a little better, but it's not quite towards what humanism is about, which is the secular view of society. And so, if I'm a humanist, let's just say I'm a humanist, I believe that when we're positively studying things, and I can say something like a society is 17% more likely to fail or whatever if you don't democratize with women in mind. Your secular society, which you pin on a map or something, that secular society is going to be more successful. You're going to be able to produce more moral claims. And that's sort of the ideology of humanism or philosophy of humanism in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think I view things like quite differently from the way that you described them. In terms of my relationship to Comte, or Comte, however his surname's actually meant to be pronounced. Was he Argentinian, right?
Argentinian and French or something, wasn't
right? I don't know I don't know a whole lot about him, but
I haven't read him since college. He's a French dude, and yeah, his philosophy, as you mentioned, was it was both it was intellectually and politically very, very relevant in Latin America during their statehood, democracy, sort of whatever it was.
Yeah. In terms of like my relationship to him, I mean, I guess I'm broadly on board with like some of the political aims and the empiricism of the positivists. Where I probably end up getting off where I arrive at with the positivists is probably something like operationalism, which I don't think gets a fair hearing historically or in contemporary analytic philosophy.
What is? Do you mind? I'm
just
not
real quick.
What is operationalism?
Hold on.
Quickly or whatever.
Yeah. So if you think
real quick, this is why it's so awesome to have people doing panels like Digital Gnosis. Again, I've got his YouTube banner ad down there, so check him out after the stream. But yeah, these types of conversations are so cool when people can loop in different ideas, and when they can reference even a couple. Not everyone has to be like an expert at philosophy. I think most people would agree with that. But when people can loop in, some like serious methodological or epistemic, counterpoints or opposing worldviews, these conversations are useful. And so what just sort of happened, I'm talking about Comte, and digital gnosis came through and he said, well, yeah, this is interesting, but we're actually going to have to look at some context for what was happening at the time. We're going to go deep into the philosophy bag, and we're going to ask, like, well, if people are saying in the first place why we believe something or why we can believe something, this sort of pragmatism, operationalism, this is something we have to take seriously. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Let's get back to the video.
Think about the sort of like various debates that the positivists are having about various topics, and you know how they're all kind of thinking about, for example, verifying things through sensations, basically, and then relating that to language and so on and so forth. What the operationalists had to say is that the meaning of words is to do with how we operationalize them against our experiences. So, for example, in the sciences, when we have a theory, what it is to have a theory or to have theoretical terms is to have a certain operationalized set of practices against those experiences.
Yeah.
And that's broadly on board with what I think. There's some. I could dig it out in a second because I put a post-it note in it, but most of the objections I come across to this sort of thing are quite sort of like cheap shots that are being relatively uncharitable.
It sounds a lot like maybe I'm probably missing some key points, but it sounds like a European corollary of like American pragmatism from Dewey and stuff like that.
I think so. I think it's being directly influenced by that. I think that the people in Cambridge were influenced by people in Cambridge, UK, were influenced by people in Cambridge, USA, into pragmatism. People like Frank Ramsey, Wittgenstein, even Bertrand Russell, actually. And then that was also influencing these people in the Vienna Circle, because they were obviously also kind of obsessed with Wittgenstein, and then Ramsey's kind of going over there and stuff. So I think that there is quite a sort of incestuous relationship with the US pragmatism there. And it's very similar. I just think it's a little bit more, I'm not saying that this is a good thing, but I think that in the Vienna Circle, they're a little bit more obsessed with like mathematical notation and precision. And so it's a little bit more in that direction, the way that they're thinking of it, than maybe like William James.
And so if I were to offer criticism then from this perspective, is this sort of in the ballpark where, I'm looking at Comte now, and I can say, well, look, there's all types of ways that we use language, we use meaning, we all kinds of ways that we communicate about the world, which leads to actual actions in the world. So maybe we can let that one sit for a little bit. But like, how is it different? I have a fly flying around me right now, and so, well, I'll just use it, right? Let's roll with it. And so, how is it different to say, well, my mic was off. I'm about to lay down a hammer, so sorry for that really awkward break in the stream. But this is a question that I wanted him to answer. In the context of Comte, a moral question is really important. When we look at something like how Comte asks questions. If someone in ancient Greece said, thou shalt not kill, I'm a Greek, I don't think you should kill anyone. What they might say is, well, Zeus or some other god, Poseidon or something, the reason we don't kill is it doesn't please the gods. We can't actually know if it pleases the gods, and so you don't kill. Maybe there is a case where it pleases the gods. Now, all of that I just said, referencing sort of this divine command from a polytheistic perspective, is what Comte is concerned with. Comte himself is concerned with taking these metaphysical or theocentric sort of religious worldviews. And so I'm about to ask, well, if I have secular ethics in line with maybe Sam Harris or what Jordan Peterson argues about, and I say I don't think having a religious black box to judge moral goodness is a good thing, does this sort of bite away at pragmatism? Does this bite away at anything we find important? Let's let the video roll. well, oh, we evolved from a scientific or from a, a superstitious sort of witchcraft, stomping around the fire society
Yeah, yeah.
to a society that gets a cup and moves a fly outside or gets a fly swatter. So like, and so like, how is a small claim different than a big claim, and is it even possible to make those sorts of big claims if, because there's not really like a truth statement in saying something ideological like we need to move beyond the nature of reality and we need to move towards studying reality.
Yeah, so I think that these views, they're not necessarily going to rule out or rule in that. I think that you could kind of go either way with respect to what you think about some kind of like arc of progress and the unity of science and are going in the right direction with respect to that, and the status of moral claims with respect to scientific claims. I think there's like a bajillion different ways of kind of combining commitments that you can take on these things and come into all sorts of different conclusions on them.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
my personal view here is not the one that you're expressing on this, in the sense that I don't think that what people in ancient cultures were doing is like proto-science, or was like a bad scientific theory or something like that. I just think people have different aims and values in the context that they're in, and they achieve those aims and values with the tools at their disposal. And some of those tools are the ways that they're culturally habituated. But I don't think that, for example, like rain dances or God was a sort of attempt at a bad version of physics or something.
So that makes sense. The reason that doesn't, if I'm defending Comte, the reason that doesn't make sense is, is like, if I say, well, only a scientific society can say, we study a fly as possibly being a moral agent or being worthy of moral consideration, and only a scientific society does this. If you're in a theocentric or a metaphysical society, if you're not in a secular society, you might say something like, we are talking about a fly, but what you mean by this, by a fly being a moral agent, isn't anything like what a person that studies what it must be like to be being something, to be worthy of moral consideration. And so the subjective. So I just want to touch on something really quick. I missed something that I think Nathan was implying here. Was that he did sort of pick up this component just a couple minutes, less than a minute ago, about, well, if we're instantiating, there is a philosophical problem. If I'm making this claim that society instantiates and particularizes through culture the way that we think about things, either religiously or metaphysically, and sort of the systems of axioms, of formal languages or informal languages, how we communicate and intuit things, society takes this big philosophy box and internalizes it. So what is what does justice to Comte about this is that there is obviously something that is almost disrespectful to the collective endeavor of producing knowledge, something that, I think Digital Gnosis and I could talk about more, something that we might even agree on some points with, where we're talking about, well, the reason that, I might say the reason ancient Greek thought wasn't horrible, and I'd love to hear, your thoughts on this, was because we know it wasn't the end of the line. Yes, there were probably some dogmatists in Greek society, but the Greeks also knew that reason uncovered knowledge about the world. They would suppose this. They would maybe even presuppose this. Whether or not that is right, it appears to be true because the Greeks didn't know about fundamental particles. They didn't know about the way engineering could apply actual stuff we see and touch in the world towards doing things. And we could presume that that sort of line of thought, at least in the Western rationalist sort of thread of tradition, as winding as this is, would have ultimately resulted in having to recontextualize a world where we have artificial intelligence computing things. We have a world where a supercomputer can simulate the laws of the universe. A quantum computer can simulate the laws of the universe. This is philosophically grounding because not only does your culture end up producing really different things, but you end up resolving problems in philosophy that we might have seen with like Plotinus, who was a mystic who talked about the one, the unity of everything. Crazy cool idea, crazy interesting stuff for Plotinus, but also not accurate philosophy in the modern context. Not totally accurate. Plato forms, if I have sunglasses, that these are made of sunglassness, right? If we're really beating the dead horse on this stuff, we're really sort of going over it and under it a couple times, trying to figure out how we get around this. Comte has this point, but that's not the end of it, right? Because what digital gnosis is also implying here is that, well, sure, so people think differently, but then we're just talking about culture. We're just talking about culture going one way, and we think of a black box of what knowledge might be, how philosophy works, why that makes sense when we learn more about cognition. And I think digital gnosis would say that absolutely it does. We do still argue about whether or not, from a postmodern perspective, we absolutely don't think psychology is or neuroscience is some, eternal system of truth seeking and truth finding. So I'm not going to suppose to know what he might know or might say, but this is a point where we disagree, which is a little more fine-grained philosophical. But let's go back to the video. Nature, I think, is something for especially atheists on YouTube. It's one of those things that's grounding. It's one of those things that can be built upon really easily. It is, I would say it's one of those things that it almost like heats up with the seasons, right? Thinking about sort of agency in a secular society. If I'm Comte, I would say that there's a period where we crank it up to 11. Everyone sees it. It's hard to deny it, and that sort of feeling or semblance where it's like, oh my God, this is nothing like what I would have been doing otherwise. That's getting into sort of like more of the actual like dogma of atheism, but that I hope it sort of captures what I was trying to say or trying to do. And
yeah, I think, I mean, what I'm getting from what you're saying is that your key concern or something is that there's certain sorts of moral claims that can only be made from a particular sort of like metaphysical way of engaging with or viewing reality. I don't know that I agree with that, just because, for example, there's like a quote by Albert Schweitzer, who is a Christian living in what I would consider to be a theocentric society, high German culture at the time. And the quote is, "Until he extends the circle of his compassion to all living things, man will not himself find peace." There are plenty of examples of tribes who take various different approaches to what they think about the status of other living creatures and their moral worth. And I think that they sort of managed to do so standing outside of, this particular sort of like scientific
I know I'm cutting you off, but we would disagree about this so much. The reason being is that I don't know how in a less postmodern, a more modern sort of modern or enlightenment sense, like people, cognition is a product of just what you grew up believing. I even think there's stuff from like Daniel Kahneman in the behavioral economics space, who he'd have to admit that it's difficult to even say what people report as they're believing. Like, yeah, it's philosophically grounding. We're not going to ever disagree about that, but it isn't grounding in the sense that I can inform statements about society or about ideology from that.
Right. So let me just make, like, is the claim here that all our beliefs are habituated, and this is just me trying to kind of interpret what I think you might be saying. I'm not really sure.
I'm gonna put my hat on too, so sorry if my mic goes weird.
Yeah, no worries. So is the claim something like, so all our beliefs are habituated, and for any particular sort of moral claim, there's like a really low probability of us like just coming across that one. And so the sort of like contingent historical route we've taken that's given us certain types of moral claims is unique in history, because it would be I don't know that you want to make the claim that it's necessary that it come from this branch, because you would want to say it could happen in other way. It could happen through other sort of like cultures that are historically disconnected, but it's just unlikely to happen or something. Is that the claim?
Yeah. I think Comte would ultimately, and I know some of the people in chat are going to be like, if there's any other like kind of materialists, whatever, they're going to be going a little crazy right now, going go Duck, go Nathan for talking about this. Also, that's my name, by the way, but I'm digressing. But like, I think Comte would push us to think of positive study or science in terms of domains. And so where in one sense, it is a domain to say I study neuropsychology or I study sociology. And that's just, and even within, sociology, maybe I'm doing like super fine-grained culture studies, or I'm trying to figure out what like how people view economic systems and incentives in a certain society. That's more Comte. I'm thinking of a person that is emerging with a worldview, or they're acting in the world, they have a will or something like that. That's something that like, to me it's nominalism, or I can't even see it. It's we talk past each other.
I mean, I think that similar moral concerns have come up in different cultures in history. I don't know that I would even say that science has been the...
We're going to pause it after this.
The thing that I would causally connect to people viewing animals with compassion, right? For example, like for example, I don't actually know that like Hitler's vegetarianism was driven by like his scientific views or something like that. It's not to, I'm a vegetarian myself, right? So I'm not, but I'm not using Hitler as an example to undermine vegetarian, the legitimacy of vegetarianism or something. But what I am doing is I'm saying I think that there are a lot of... Now you could still say he's in a sort of like scientific culture, so that's sort of the way he's got there. But I think you still have to cash out exactly what the causal relationship is there. Like, because it's otherwise it's just sort of like a gesture. But I do think that there are just in my mind a lot of different cultures that seem to have valued the moral worth. Look at Hinduism, for example, right?
Okay.
And the way that they treat cows and think of like other animals, or the way that something like karma plays a role in a lot of these Eastern cultures' conceptions of morality and how that means to treat other forms of life that aren't human.
I mean, I hear that deeply. We swear on this channel. I don't want to fucking finish what I had to say there. It was a great point. I'm going to call out Digital Gnosis one time. Go check out either the thumbnail, or I pinned a comment up top with a link to, or it's not pinned. I'll pin it right now. If I can click on it, if YouTube lets me click on it. I just pinned the message, so if you refresh chat, you'll see a link to Nathan's channel. Digital Gnosis, amazing content creator. Really grateful he hosted me on his channel. It was just a call-in panel, so it wasn't like a formal thing, but really smart guy, really considerate guy. And I think we go back here. I think we go back to the emo music in the schedule and stuff. Really cool conversation. And for people who are looking at this sidebar and saying, well, I don't know Digital Gnosis, I don't know secular humanism, I don't know positivism, this is all gibberish. No problem, right? We're going to unpack one sort of point, which is about moral claims and whether or not this is ideology. So is this philosopher, this hoity-toity pretentious guy, is he telling us, in his heart of hearts, knows in our heart of hearts, when I say something like, oh, well, I'm also a vegan. I make sure to shop. I use tiny cups to drink water. I don't just shower unnecessarily or turn my air down to like 75, for no reason. I try and do that kind of stuff. I consider social issues. Is Comte, would he accuse me possibly of being dogmatized? Am I being dogmatic? If someone is Christian and they do the same thing, are they being dogmatic? If someone is Muslim, are they being dogmatic? What about a Jain, a Buddhist, a Hindu? Is all this stuff just out the window? I mean, I'm a former Catholic, right? And so as a former Catholic, I was allowed to read this beautiful copy of Harry Potter. I hope you have a nice view of this. Beautifully animated, beautifully, there's pop-out images, and some really nice, lithographic sort of prints and stuff in this version of Harry Potter. Really nice hardcover copy. There was nothing wrong with a book like this, growing up Catholic, because, this would teach you that, there's non-linear paths to success. You don't always know your core story. Maybe that's not what matters. And from a moral perspective, when I'm creating a moral position, a moral stance, and I'm saying something like, well, look, I don't need to be so hard on myself, or there are issues where I should be hard on myself, because you can't just not fight Voldemort. You cannot just not fight you who shall not be named. It turns out that the justice or the injustice that is right, that lives in this, is that, it doesn't really sound like secular ideology is, secular thought, not really ideology, but, I don't believe in a God and therefore let's go from there. It doesn't seem like this is, either does or doesn't have a shot. Maybe Auguste Comte does or doesn't have a shot. This is when, folks, we forget what else is on the calendar, and we go into documentary mode a little bit. We have to go into documentary mode. Let's, I hope you can hear me and the music okay. We're doing some big things. Just let it ride for a second. Do you guys feel how important this is to answer? Because who else amongst us was an ideologue? Fascists like Mussolini and Hitler were ideologues. And so, let's. I want us to examine this issue of humanism from both sides real quick. Let's examine humanism from both sides. We picture, a couple different atheists, and when we're asking about what a humanist has to say, are they going to run for political office? Are they going to try and change the laws? There's a good reason to say that no, not really, not in any sense that's meaningful, because we already have a secular government, and that's the end of it. What did Mussolini say that was different? Mussolini said that individuals without a government, individuals without a state were nothing. There was nothingness. There was corruption, there was immoralness, and if there was anything other than that, there was nothingness. It was actually a void, right? Duck out of frame. This is Mussolini's government. This is Mussolini's government peeking in, saying, hello, do I see human rights? Do I see civil rights or anything? I don't see any civil rights. And guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna start the black shirts. That's not why I'm wearing a black shirt, by the way. I'm not a fascist. But I'm gonna start the black shirts. And so not only are you nothing if you're an individual, we're actually gonna regulate it if you're nothing. Comte doesn't say this. Comte says that, look, all I'm saying is that if I can study a fly or a dog, a cow, I can study what a good house might be like, right? I've got a little bit of that blue collar. I'm turning stuff over. I don't know. I sound like a European criticizing the United States. I'm gonna go turn some stuff over. And if I do this, if I say this, I gotta go turn everything over to study a house, to study a fly. That's all Comte is saying. That's all he's saying is look, if you can study what the neurons in the mind of a fly might be like, it might be worth considering that fly is worthy of moral consideration. Period. And if societies generalize these types of claims, look at what I mean here. Let's get really serious. I wish I had something other than this sort of whatever. I wish I had something a little more upbeat, because I have here's my stack of books. I have my communist Che Guevara. I'm going to generalize something. I want to study revolutions. I'm Comte. I want to know about revolutions. I want to know about the Che Guevara and Che Guevara, what was he doing in Africa? What did he think about Cuba? What did Fidel Castro think about the guy? Did he know Jimmy Carter? Who else should he have known? Was Jimmy Carter president then? I don't know. Jimmy Carter was a peaceful president who was also in the Air Force, I believe. I also have, you're not going to be able to see this, but this is, rest in peace, Mr. Daniel Kahneman. I hope this is the right way. This is a copy of, if you guys can see this, Thinking Fast and Slow, behavioral economist. A neuroscientist, behavioral economist, just regular economist, whatever you want to call the guy. He studied why people respond to incentives or respond to any sort of decision, why people make choices, what it's like to act. I want to study what brains do when I give you a 25% off coupon. I've got a revolution, I've got a 25% off coupon. These are things I'm asking about. This guy, another one you're not going to see because I lose covers to books. Jeremy Rifkin. I think this guy was an economist. I think he was a big-time economist, if I recall correctly. And he wrote this called The Empathic Civilization. He's talking like Jeffrey Sachs, or what the woke right would call these globalists. But he's not really doing that. He's talking about the sharing economy. He's talking about how individuals make collective choices, why there's incentive to do this, how we think about things like opportunity and risk, and about civilization before, sometimes at the same time that we're making economic considerations. So I'm also curious, like, can I just build a train from New York to frickin' San Diego or something? Can we share a car? Do we all have to pay for a car? I've got Harry Potter. I talked about this. I've got Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, and last but not least, I've got one more book here. I've got Chronicles of Narnia. Is this Auguste Comte? This is C.S. Lewis. I have Christian literature in my household, Christian kids books in my household. Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis on top of this other massive, almost comical stack of books. And this is like, just this tiny list is like 1/10 of the size, probably 1/20th, 5% of the books I had to read for college. We're gonna start putting some of this stuff back. We're putting this stuff back in place. And so when I'm asking if a fly is worthy of moral consideration, or the type of moral relationship that the United States would have with, like, Kenya is a place that the United States, we love Kenya. Kenya is moving towards liberalism. They should be a stabilizing force in the region. Geopolitics, multipolarity, blah 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 blah. Don't overcomplicate it. People in Kenya and the United States could talk about getting a job together. We could talk about AI together. We could talk about lots of stuff. And if they decide they want to go do that with someone else, cool. From my perspective, my vantage, good on them. And so Auguste Comte is not an ideologue, because he's just saying, if you have a question, find the goddamn fucking answer to the question you asked. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Yeah, the Narnia books. Coder. Yeah. And so, And so Mussolini, you should be able to juxtapose the massive difference between Comte not being an ideologue, because he just says you have to ask a question a certain way. You have to be able to answer that question a certain way. And if you're, look at the pile of crap that you have, right? If you're trying to bang out a couple chapters for, reading for a sociology class, nothing you say or do is going to change that you're doing sociology. That's who you are, what that is. And, like, to be completely honest, if you're not one of the lucky chosen ones, who's going to go on for a PhD, just learn the fucking sociology and get on with it. All Comte was saying, Comte being an ideologue, the opposite of this, saying, look, I have my fascist dictionary here, my Western thought, fascism mindset on me, is that the average experience, the average human being on Earth is going to go with the church, right? No one expects the Holy Roman Empire, whatever the meme is. That kind of stuff, dude. That kind of stuff is absolutely insane. That kind of stuff is insane. You know, I'm gonna take a quick break. Do you know what I'm gonna do, because I have you guys captive here? Because I've got someone captive here. I'm gonna put on my you know, this is what ideology and scary stuff actually sounds like. Let's see if we can get this baby playing.
Disaster song. Yeah. I retracted his scapula, fucking bring it back to Africa. The bastard was bad habits and badder than Tijuana. I kept the goon squad guessing and fucked through fury and thunder. He said he'd never been to Australia, but told me he'd gone under anesthesia. So Anastasia came to stay. We dreamed that both of us would take cash like back in the day. Bag boys, I take the back and he trained the watchdogs. When we head back, we'll black the dossier, the shield what he pinned his dreams on. A flag, but I'm not done with him. We got a color palette and no cap, I didn't bring a cap gun. Time for action mags for revolution or revolt. Dubai doesn't need a plane flight if you already sound dope. I'm out of my mind, out of my sight. Better rewind, better not joke. I'm out of my line and out of my depth. Let's just try to not blow smoke. In position, he must have missed the Spanish Inquisition. Taxing the phone bills with prepaid cards and ambitions. Dereliction.
My bad. My bad. Okay, we're not doing self-music promos. We're not doing any self-music promos. We're closing the stream out pretty soon, I think. I think that's what we're doing. Let me go back here. You know, I had fun doing some of this stuff. You know, so is Comte an ideologue? I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't have a great opinion on it. You know, and so I don't even have, I feel so poor right now. I don't even have a freaking soundboard. I had a soundboard here, but it's not working in OBS Studio. And so when I look at my sad audio, I can hear myself talking, I can hear myself going over the limit. So what we're gonna do, Ryan, Radical Coder, thanks for joining. I don't think anyone else is here, otherwise I'd definitely push Ryan's channel. Good to see you. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cue the intro and we're gonna end the stream. Cool.